Welcome to Solink in the Cloud, where we are talking to industry leaders about topics that matter. I'm Kathy Langley, Senior Leader of Asset Protection with Solink. Solink's mission is to protect people, patrons, and profits, which is why we're bringing together thought leaders within the loss prevention, asset protection, and retail security industries to share their expertise and passion. Joining me today, I have Ann Sullivan. Ann is the managing partner at Eye on Your Brand. And so, Ann, for our listeners, can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history?
Absolutely. As you said, my name is Ann Sullivan, and I'm the managing partner of Eye on Your Brand. My history comes from, I started out as an end user in the retail and food industry, my last job being vice president of asset protection and risk for CKE restaurants, and then started Eye on Your Brand in 2018 and haven't looked back since.
That's awesome. And it's, you bring to Eye on Your Brand all of your past experiences. And I was thinking about this earlier, or how it's interesting for the last, 5 years now, all of the folks that you have helped, guided, and then have heard their stories. And it's got to be like an exciting time for you, just like every time you help somebody win. Like, that's just right. We're all in this together. So give me an example of the type of companies that are going to call Eye on the Brand. Like, who are you hearing from?
Okay, so we're a company that leverages video, and we help folks in the loss prevention, safety, and operational standards area. And everybody that touches every industry. So the folks that we get calls from would be restaurants, fast food, warehouses, banking systems. We handle houses of worship and daycare centers. It's incredible. We've even taken calls, Kathy, from families of seniors who have had fraud happen to them looking for help.
That's, when you break it down to anybody who potentially has a CCTV system, right? Anybody who's using cameras, again, a wide, you're covering so many verticals there.
Absolutely.
So when you and I started chatting about doing this podcast, we were throwing out all kinds of ideas. And, initially we're talking about, how do you take a CCTV program from a cost center to a profit center? And then we sort of talked about all of the stages of CCTV. So just to prep our listeners here, what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about the stages of CCTV. And Ann and I are probably going to go off on a million different directions. So hang with us as we walk through this. And always our goal from Solink is that listeners, grab 2 or 3 nuggets of information that can help them do better for their employer, for themselves, et cetera. So let's start with your history versus an end user and now in the consulting realm. How difficult is it to get the buy-in for, let's start with the CCTV system. Like, what are the challenges there?
Yeah, so it's funny because while our company is focused on leveraging video, we do get a lot of calls from folks who either have a system and they're trying to upgrade and they're getting pushback from their C-level, or folks that want a system and they're just overwhelmed with, what do I need? And, the vendors are all telling me, this, that, and I don't understand it. So honestly, I kind of break it into 2 buckets. Either you have a company that does not have any cameras, and they want to add cameras, which is very easy. You show a quick test and the ROI, and you get a new CCTV system. Now, where the challenge comes in is when you have a company out there and they either need to upgrade or add to. It's so much more difficult, and you wouldn't think so because the infrastructure is in place. But reality is, what they will look at is most of the time they have cameras that were originally poorly placed. Maybe the recorders weren't set up properly or have never been used to their full capabilities. The systems have become dilapidated and unmaintained. And then even more sadly, what you face is gave you money in the first place, you did nothing with it, there was no return, and now you got to fight that.
Yeah, good point. So when again, so no CCTV system, a pretty easy sell.
Yeah.
An enhancement when you had a poorly run program a very, very heavy lift.
Very heavy.
So are you from a standpoint of, let's just say I'm coming to you, I have a CCTV program, maybe I don't even know how to get the best out of it. Are you guiding me in that of saying, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Like what's that conversation look like with somebody?
You know, I do give them guidance on, and I will just tell you, a lot of times if I'm speaking to a CFO, for the most part, I can just kind of talk them through and then they understand the numbers. My challenges come when I speak with loss prevention or HR, folks, and saying, okay, you can do this, 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 and this, because so many times they don't even have the resources to do that. I mean, it's one of the areas, companies cut in. And so it can be such a big lift. And I can give you an example. When I was at CKE, here you have a $4 billion company, and they were probably my biggest challenge just to get recording device upgrades in my whole 30 years of doing this. So, yeah.
Okay. So I guess in some cases, people, I'm going to say they don't know what they have, right? And maybe think about it from a narrow view. Like if I'm an asset protection professional, I may be thinking of it as, I want to catch bad guys, or I want to catch internal theft, right? How do you get people beyond that? And maybe it's more like giving them an assignment to say, like, where are all your other opportunities? Or
Sure.
I just from a standpoint of I've already invested this money, I'm not getting value out of it, and maybe to your point, maybe I don't even have the resources to use the system.
Sure.
Like just 100%. Getting past that. That's yeah.
Those are some big challenges. So as I said, I'll go into my example. When I took over CKE, here I've got $4 billion company with 850 locations who had 4 RLPMs to manage loss prevention, which is a very high store count. They had cameras. They even had their own monitoring center, multi-million-dollar alarm monitoring center on site. So you would think we'd be able to take a look at the video, but unfortunately, due to bandwidth, they couldn't even connect to the DVRs. When I joined, I go, to my boss, who was chief legal, and said, we need recorders. And he was like, yeah, no, they've never done anything before. We're not going to give you another $1 million for that. And he said, you go out and you show me we need them, we can talk again. But he was willing to give me money to upgrade the loss prevention team force, which was huge. And so I brought in some new loss prevention professionals. And honestly, my hiring of them was, your professionals, we work up here. And then these guys come into the job and I go, now I want you to work down here. Okay, I need old school LP boots on the ground. And I want you to go to the restaurants and catch me some bad guys. Now, coming out of my mouth, anyone who knows me, they're like, what? And why is that? I'm going to be honest with you. Fraud sells. It's sexy as all get out.
Yeah.
Okay? You show that person putting the money in the pocket. Everyone gets excited.
That's right. You're right. It is. I mean, the money in the pocket shot is, it doesn't get old, right? It doesn't get old.
Sure. Wants to see the Jerry Springer Festival.
That's right. From a standpoint of it, as I'm thinking about this, and we have this, this big thing of a CCTV program. Do you find that a challenge is the retailer, or the financial institution, et cetera, whoever your client is, that they want to run before they've even started walking and should have started crawling? Like, how do you coach them from a building the program, right? From a standpoint of, probably we should crawl first before we walk and then we run. Sure,
100%. And that seems to be the running first. A lot of times is the downfall of many systems, and departments for that matter. You think you get everything. You get the system that everyone has always wanted, but you forgot to put the, foundation in to operate the system. You forgot to put the needs to support the system. And, unfortunately, that is where we kind of lose that ability. My personal on systems is remote access should be what you use to identify and reduce and eliminate fraud. Boots on the ground is what you use for training, awareness, and gaining operational support to the systems you have purchased. Because reality is, when you have 850 locations, 4 people can't do it alone, and I don't care what system you bought. But when you have 850 locations that you've brought in your ops and all your partners to leverage that system, you start getting something that shows value and worth.
Right. So from a, as you talk about remote access, well, let me back up a second and talk about the guidance and counseling. I'm going to say counseling, I guess, guidance, that you give to clients when they come to you and say, I want to do this. I even have the buy-in. So I'm through the buy-in process. I want to do this. Now I'm exploring, and there's so many solution providers out there. Like, as we talk about this, I guess that's really like the first stage, right? Like, okay, I can do this. Now I need to decide, who am I working with? Like, let's talk about, like, what guidance do you give them? Are there red flags to look for? Like, what are those pieces?
I'd love it if we could actually come back to that question.
Oh, sure.
Because when I'm talking to a client, the first thing I'm going to ask them, and sometimes they're actually already at that stage, but what they haven't thought about is thinking about from the system, from the starting place, is what's your goals?
Good call. Yep.
Understanding who's going to use the system, what are they going to use it for, and why are you truly buying the system?
And when you talked about resources before, so you can have your goals. Do you actually have the resources to achieve your goals?
And that's 100%. When I have folks tell me, well, I'm buying it because we just caught Sally steal money, so now I need a system. And I very bluntly will tell people, if you are buying a new camera system, or upgrading your camera system, or leveraging your camera system just for fraud, you're wasting your money. You're just wasting your money. What are you going to do? Have somebody sit there and watch it 24/7 and, catch someone for stealing $200, and you're paying this person, anywhere from $60,000 to $120,000 a year?
Right. And the old adage of how long does it take to watch 24 hours worth of video, right?
Well, exactly. The other thing is, when you're taking out people for fraud, instead of trying to proactively stop them from stealing, with awareness training, it costs more to replace an employee in today's market, where everyone's struggling for employees, than to the actual return you're going to get from catching them stealing.
Right. Okay.
And
So
one thing, Kathy, I want to point out, because people will push back on that. I get it all the time, and they go, oh, really? Well, I caught someone for $25,000 in register theft last month. And I go, well, how did someone get to $25,000 in register theft in the first place?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, we've both been in the industry long enough to remember when a big statement was like, people are high-fiving, everybody's excited about it. And you're like, now you're like, the threshold of acceptable statement levels has gone down dramatically over the years. And it is, it's a red flag.
Absolutely.
Who missed it, right? And how did we miss it? And what do we need to do to catch it faster? Right. It is not, you're absolutely right. So yeah, those large statements are, I mean, again, we all know they happen, right? But it's not a big win. I mean, at least you caught them at that point, but what do you need to do ahead of time in order to catch that?
Sure.
So we build out our use cases, and we either know we have the resources to take care of our use cases, and or is that could actually be like, if we plan this as like a decision tree, a branch of that decision tree could be, I know I need to do X, but I need to find a more efficient way to do it because I don't have the people to monitor this. So I need either some kind of alerting system or some kind of, way to narrow my view down.
Right.
So if I have my use cases and I have my resources, then what's next in
Okay.
the whole process?
All right. So when you talk about resources, I just want to point on something because that is a challenge people will look for. One of the things you also want to do with your cameras, though, is take a look at other things that you could potentially solve with that system. Because you can then take the resources that are being spent in those areas and pull them into leveraging the system. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Give me an example of that.
Okay, so one of the things I always share with people after we get past, the initial stages, now let's ask ourselves, what other challenges can we do? And so when you look at that, if you could relieve excessive false alarms, you could take the resources of the people tracking them, and you could take the monetary for false alarm fines and put that towards your return on investment. Your next place, and I don't care if you're in retail or fast food, banking, robberies. Robberies are huge, not only for the loss, the fear, the brand, and your risk. So if you can actually change robberies and reduce folks from having robberies, and you're like, well, how would you do that with a camera system? Well, let's leverage our camera system and the technology it has and identify folks arriving early or leaving late alone. Easy robbery target. Too much cash in the drawer. Easy. I don't have to go audit a drawer. I can do it in a 1-second shot. Look, are they making the drops? Backdoor robberies. Are they in compliance? These are all areas that will absolutely, build not only on the ROI, but also for the folks you had doing all that footwork before. You no longer have someone investigating a robbery because it didn't happen. You have them spending less time mitigating, again, putting those resources in the bucket. And then you step out on, unfortunately, all technology has issues. So POS exception reporting, okay? If you have it, fantastic. If you don't, you get it. It's gonna give you quicker identification for training opportunities. So many people think what they think is fraud, and they're chasing this case, and it's just a training opportunity. Or you have POS errors. Again, you're chasing it for fraud. It's just an error. You can, take those resources of the chase and now focus on leveraging it, for the fraud and just resolution or preventing the fraud. And then probably your last one is, so many people don't think about big cost savings. If you were to leverage your CCTV system to complement systems like energy management or maintenance concerns, huge return on investment. And those departments start loving you because you've taken now the workload off their plate.
You just went through a lot there, Ann. There's a lot there. Thank you. I'm gonna ask you a couple follow-up questions on a few of these. So when you talk, or even a statement. So when we talk about one of the things you mentioned was robberies, right? The impact that has on your brand, the impact that has on associate. Like, I personally have never had a gun pointed in my face. I'm very thankful for that, right?
Absolutely.
But there's a ton of folks out there who have that are serving the public. So when we reduce the robberies, you mentioned two things, right? Am I opening the location alone? Am I closing the location alone? Huge. And then the other thing is the cash, your cash pickups and everything, not having too much money in your drawer. And that goes back to the whole risk versus reward, right? If I hit a location, if I'm a robber, I hit a location and I'm able to score, $2,000 out of the cash, like let's be real, these folks talk to one another, right?
Agreed.
And so as you are able to, anything that you can do with your CCTV system, especially paired with other technologies that you talked about, that you can reduce that, it's a huge win. The other thing I think that does, especially as you're working to reduce robberies, is it's huge for your employees, right?
100%.
You show that you care about those employees as leaders, and that goes a long way when we talk about, how much does it cost to hire a new person and everything, right? So that's another big piece of it. The other piece is, you mentioned about the POS synchronization with data and the benefits of that. I think also that piece, you talked about like, is it really fraud, or is it really theft, or is it a training issue?
Correct.
And I think that sometimes we miss the opportunities to and I'm gonna it's a two-side story here, right? But also coach and train our people up front, but then also that shows perception of control.
Yep.
Right. So, and I think sometimes we can compliment people for doing things right, but we also have there's that we know that we can see this video remotely and we understand what's going on, but most importantly, coach and train early on, and that's a huge opportunity.
And Kathy,
So,
if I could interject right there on the piece of the employees, and this is something in my career I've seen way too many times, it's using an ineffective system or not leveraging the system properly, and a loss prevention person gets information and sits down across from a team member and interviews them. And while I have always been big on, it's all about a conversation and you back out as soon as you realize you are not on the right track. There's a lot of folks that don't get that, and they will keep drilling for the fraud that actually doesn't exist because it's either a POS error or the refund was actually done earlier and they were too busy. So they just didn't follow a policy, but they didn't steal anything. And you have now taken that employee and put them in a place, because I don't care how good you are, it's still embarrassing to have someone sit across from you and ask you about fraud.
that's right. That's right.
You know,
And that
so
relationship has been destroyed.
it's 100%. I don't care how good you are. And a lot of it will lead with the handshake and they feel better because you try to make them feel better. But the reality is you shouldn't have made the error in the first place.
Right. No, that's a really good call out. And I think it's, I like to think that we as an industry, continue to rise above that, but we're still an industry made of humans, right? So,
100%.
right. So those things still occur. That's a really good call out, because at the end of the day, it is all about people and building relationships, whether it's, with your employees, with a solution provider, with your leaders, et cetera. When you talk, can you give me an example? You talked about energy management when you said, okay, we got all of these pieces. Talk to me a little bit about energy management.
Okay, so this is actually a crazy area you can recover profit in. So just simple things like, we're all on the cameras all the time. Simple things like identifying that the AC is running all night when it shouldn't be. Lights are turning off too early or turning on too late in the morning, and your team members are leaving in the pitch black or, in the dark. Another easy one is you have, let's say these encampments are opening up, and we have a lot of clients call us and say, hey, we have a transient issue at night. They have built their, encampments on my sidewalk when my team members come in, which again is a safety issue. Allowing them to leverage the energy management system to brighten it up for a few weeks and make it not as, friendly of a place. And then the other thing is we work a lot with facilities. Which sounds crazy, cameras in facilities, but, we'll say the restaurant world, having to send a tech out to check the freezer or the cooler because the temperature has dropped, which is very serious for food safety, being able to check a camera and see if maybe the door was just left open, too long, you just saved $250 to $275 in a trip charge. There's nothing wrong. And then, the last thing that I talk about when I talk about maintenance concerns, and this is a big one, we have a large client who transitioned over to a new pest control company. And we all know in all industries, pest control is, very important. And we just do some compliance spot checks on the vendors and ended up identifying, actually more than not, the pest control people who were visiting the sites off clock, where we have them. I have an example, and I'd be happy to send you the video. He actually walks in, he pumps the little bucket, and then turns around and walks out. Now everyone will laugh and go, well, okay, he didn't service the restaurant, so they'll give us back the $150. But stop and think about that. This restaurant now didn't get service, so what happens if they do have a flying pest, a roach problem, a rodent problem, and somebody videos it? You've now damaged the brand, and that could have been prevented.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, this is completely side, and we didn't even chat about this ahead of time, but you mentioned brand so many times.
Yeah.
And obviously the name, of your consulting group is Eye on the Brand. How did you come up with that?
Because when I decided to start my company, I first started it after leaving the CKE. It was another company that moved out, of California, and I didn't want to leave. And I really wanted to be, I've loved 30 years of doing this, but I wanted to make sure I always had a place for my team to go and that I could help even the little guy. Big companies, but the little guy. Everyone could afford loss prevention, asset protection. And so when I started stepping back, I thought, what's made me the most successful in my career? And while everybody can go out and get, crazy amounts of, confessions or catch theft, but it really takes, probably that dedication to prevent it in the first place and to figure out how can you partner with every part of the company and be important to every part, because you're touching all levels of the organization and giving back to all of them. And that's when you become a successful loss prevention department, and nobody wants to cut in a successful loss prevention department.
That's right. And that thank you for that. And when you think about it, some departments run to say, like, this is the only thing within my wheelhouse. But when you branch out and you become that ultimate business partner, you are perceived as indispensable.
100%.
Like, absolutely indispensable. And I know I knew we would get off. I knew I would get off track from time to time from CCTV, but ultimately that's what this is about, is protecting your brand and is making the most of the money that you've invested in a particular system.
Sure.
So what would you say is next in my strategy? So I've defined my use cases, I've looked at my resources, I understand who's using what pieces. What is the next step? Is there a next step?
It's time to start meeting with vendors and looking at the systems. You now know what you're looking for and what you got to touch on. So now you got to set up those meetings.
So do you have, and this is, both former practitioners, you and I have lived this. It's overwhelming and it's a lot of work to do it right.
Yeah.
To do it right. And really initially it's preliminary conversations. These are the things that I want to accomplish. Building out ultimately a roadmap, knowing that this may be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And is the partner that the solution provider that I'm looking for, can they take me all the way to my goal, right? Can they be with me the whole way through? And are they going to be with me the whole way through? So understanding, I'm going to say, like, checking on my boxes to say, can they do all the things I want them to do? If they can't do something, is it on their roadmap?
Right.
And I say that and I go, like, really on the roadmap? And do we have a timeline for it if it's critical to me? But then also, I guess, would you say next is talking to other clients that the solution provider uses? Like, I hate to say a reference check, but calling your peers and saying, who do you use? Why do you use them? What do you like? Is that your next step?
Yeah, so I always tell folks, you want to be current on the technology and how it's evolving daily. And it includes everything you just said, who's, status quo and who's moving forward and evolving with the industry. And that's where a lot of people come to us and go, well, we don't want to do that. Could you guys do that? And then I talk to folks, if they want to do it themselves, do your homework. You want to talk to all those industry partners, no matter what systems they're using. And after they explain their systems and what they like about it, what their challenges are, you ask them, if you could change right now, who would you go with? And why?
That's a good one.
Yeah, and that starts leading you down the path of things they've heard, they've seen at a show that maybe you didn't. Because it's not only about the capabilities, it's about the quality of the system. And then I will just tell you, at the end of the day, you hit on it. It's about the service level then, and then after they get the check, what's it going to look like?
Right. And that's I love your question of, if you could change today, who would you go with? Because a piece of that could be, they promised me the moon and they're not delivering, or they're not keeping up with the industry. and or they're also not telling me what else I could be doing, right? I mean,
Exactly.
in our industry, like I'm gonna say I love the transition that our industry went when we went from and it was said vendor versus solution provider and then solution partner, right? Like I love that transition because ultimately I would be wanting those folks to bring to me, like, what else could I be using the system? So, all right. So I own the brand also helps, whether it's a retailer, financial institution, like you would actually help them do that legwork for them.
Yeah, if
And
they want us to.
them,
Yeah,
right?
if they want us to. Like I said, a lot of folks want to do it themselves and they just want some guidance of, am I on the right, track? Because
Right.
anybody out there can reach out to a loss prevention partner or, a HR partner or an ops partner and say, do you like what you're using? Is it what you expected? That's probably one of my big ones. Is it what you expected?
Right. Okay.
And then Kathy, I will tell you one thing I end all my conversations on after folks tell me, because there are some folks out there who have bought a system and have never even thought about future upgrades or sharing technology. They got their system, they were overwhelmed at first, they're happy with it, and there's no thought process after. As long as it's working, we're great. And so I always end my calls with, hey, real quick, when was the last time XYZ offered some new technology or shared some new technology? Because it's about a collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely about collaboration and shared. Hey, you can leverage a system like this, or hey, we have other clients that are leveraging like this, and actually share that, whether it be just through web communication, but continues the growth and continues to listen to clients to grow.
Right. And when you start your either, let's say I'm coming to you with just guidance, I'm going to do it on my own, but I'm coming to you for guidance. Are there any red flags you tell me to look out for? Like if I'm looking for a CCTV partner, are there any red flags, or do you feel that the process is pretty much the same with every solution provider? Like what am I like, oh wait, if I don't know, what are my red flags?
Okay, so every solution provider is not created equal. I will just tell you. And so things that I tell folks you want to look for, you got to weed out the fact from the fiction. Validate, validate, validate. You will have delivery or salespeople, because a lot of times you have, the solution and then you have a salesperson, the integrator. You might be promised the world, but at the end of the day, you got some teeny tiny little county that no one's ever heard of in your system. But I will tell you, one of the biggest red flags I tell to everybody, and I this was just yesterday, I got a call from a client and said, hey, I want to test this system. Do you think the system could work for me? And I was like, yeah, no, it could work for you. And they said, okay, they want $3,000 to do a test. Now, I'm going to tell you now, any company, and I don't care who hears this, that has to charge for a test to a 400 location client, you don't have enough faith in your own product.
No, that's a good call out. And I guess you would also give me like all of the parameters in the all of the certifications that you should be looking for from a video protection standpoint, right?
Absolutely.
Like cybersecurity, all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Oh, 100. Nobody. Do you realize I have never, to this day, with the exception of my banking clients, never asked about cybersecurity protection?
Ever.
They just look at me like, what? I thought IT handled that. And I'm like, this is your video. Your video, I have news for everyone, is your brand. It's how your company operates.
I know I used to always say that if there's a breach in the company that I work for, it will not be through my systems, right?
Yeah,
like
you're absolutely
I am
correct.
not going to be the weak link here. Yeah,
yep,
absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much for your time, your experience. So we have covered a ton here when it comes to CCTV programs, what to look for, building the strategy of what are my use cases? Do I have the resources? How do I source a solution provider? And when we opened the podcast, we talked about we're going to go from a cost center to a profit center. And we're out of time for this podcast, but Ann and I are going to do a part 2. And in that part 2, we are going to talk more about the profit center piece and building your ROI. So I'm going to end with a question for Ann. And when we start the next podcast, this will be the first thing that we talk about. And so, Ann, what I want to know is the proudest moment of your career when you think about delivering an ROI, right? We all have those very proud moments in our career, but when you with your history of CCTV and building ROI and turning them into profit centers, what the audience is going to be looking for is, what was your proudest moment? So we're going to end there. We'll come back for a part 2. But Ann, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your experience and just being with us and sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it.